Hey guys, Ted Bogert here. Welcome back to the TED Show's Investor You, where we focus on the investor, and it doesn't have to just be real property. It can be in startups, it can be in you, it can be in personnel, it can be anything that you want to invest in. We do spend the majority of our time, though, talking about our crazy world of investments when it comes to real estate. And I have my co-host with the most, the one and only Derek Carmichael with Carmichael International. He is here today. Welcome, Derek. Of course, welcome back. And our special guest is Chris Rich. Chris Rich is with the Realty Medics. Now he's going to tell you what that means. He's not a doctor. He just plays one on this show.
That's awesome.
Chris on. Welcome, gentlemen. How you doing today?
Doing great.
Doing well.
Good. That background, Chris, is that real or is that a like?
Yeah, no, that's real. So that's our conference room over there, and that's our GM's office right there. We're on our main room. Here's a individual, call it the dog bone, because the office is shaped like a dog bone.
Nice. Oh, it is real.
That's other Chris. Oh yeah, no, that's real.
Love it. All right. Well, before we get to you, Chris, obviously we want to start with Derek. Derek, for those people who don't know you, tell them about you and what you do.
Awesome. How you guys doing? Derek Carmichael, owner of Carmichael International, real estate brokerage, hard money lender and investor, and now mentor. So hit me up if you have any questions about this crazy world of real estate and investing.
I love it. That's right. So without further ado, we have Chris Rich. Chris is just one of the good guys, always sponsoring stuff, super involved in the community. It's taken me 10 tries to figure out what the Realty Medics was in the beginning. Now that I know, I'm like, oh, you need to come on this show and share what you do. So welcome, Chris. Tell us a little bit about you and your background.
So I currently do sales and marketing for the Realty Medics. We're a long-term single-family property management company. We're probably the biggest in Central Florida. Used to be in law enforcement before this position, and pure happen chance, got an opportunity to make a hard right turn in the career, and haven't looked back since.
Yeah. Interesting. Law enforcement to property management. So
yeah,
what was that like? Talk about the journey, though. You get in. Was it what you expected? Did you immediately begin having to knock on doors and take care of doors? What was that like?
So long story short, I was at dinner with one of the owners, Ben Sensabaugh, after a softball game. And at the time I was doing undercover narcotics, and I was at like 61, 62 hours for the week. And this is a Thursday night. And I was just complaining about how much I was working and how we were doing some stuff kind of crazy. And Ben was like, why don't you make a change? I was like, I would quit tomorrow if I had a job making X. I basically just said my cop salary. And he goes, that's it? And I was like, yeah. He's like, are you serious? I was like, I'd quit tomorrow. And he's like, he looks at Jason, my direct boss. They look at each other, look back at me, look at the beer in front of me. He's like, are you serious? I was like, I'm not drunk. I'm dead serious. And he's like,
my gosh.
He's like, if you're serious, we need to talk. And long story short, I interviewed with him, and he had envisioned a role of an outside sales rep to go to the events and really develop those relationships with the agents, the brokers, lenders, title people, really anyone in the real estate sphere who may know someone that has an investment property or properties. So yeah, that's kind of, I made a giant leap of faith, and it's been a really good decision looking back on it. So
what have you take? What did you take from what did you take from law enforcement into, now that I'm a little scared of you, what did you take from law enforcement into property management? Like, was it because you have to be very scheduled, you have to be very disciplined. I know enough about property management to know that is the furthest thing from anything that I personally will want to do. So I have a great deal of respect for people who do it. I have a great deal of respect for the money, to me, the little amount of money you all ask to manage all of this insanity.
Yeah, luckily for me, I'm not on the operations side, but the benefits and things I brought over from the law enforcement side is I can talk to literally anyone, and that came over from that field, and just being normal with people. I feel like I come across really genuine, because whether it was a drug dealer or a victim or a normal person on a traffic stop, I dealt with people from all walks of life. And part of my concern before making the transition was like, what could I really do? All I knew was law enforcement outside of, some sales stuff before, inside sales, working at a gun range. I ran an oil change earlier in life. And What I learned after making the transition is there were a lot of those skill sets that did transition over. What is selling? It's really active listening. Well, what is interviewing? That's active listening. So I had those skills there. I just didn't really know how well they would apply once I made the transition. But it's been really good so far. I apparently have a natural ability for sales.
Well, obviously, if you were undercover, you have a poker face. So you must not have a tell. How does your wife think about that when you say that you are? Do you win arguments? I'm curious about this. I've actually had undercover people who've been undercover before who've gotten out, and we talk about that. I'm like, how am I ever gonna? Is your wife ever know if you're BSing her, if you're just nodding in the right places? Are you good at that? Because I had one guy share a story, and he's like, my wife has never ever questioned anything that I've said.
Wow.
My wife can tell. I'm with her. I just can't do it. Everyone else I can. I guess it's a really good thing. But yeah, I
That's
can.
good.
Where she gets in trouble is I set up arguments. Like I don't just if I know I've got you, I don't just tell you I've got you. I let you answer the questions and lay the groundwork to
Nice.
get you. Like I was having a debate with my mom, a few months. Well, actually about a year ago now. And she's like, I call you all the time. And I'm like, do you? I was like, check your call logs. Cause I knew she didn't. And she's like, I don't know how to. I was like, don't worry. I know how to, And then she's like, whoa, kind of really opened her eyes to it. So I don't just outright come and tell you like, hey, this is the way it is. But my wife, yeah, she can read me like a book, unfortunately.
Hey, Derek, have you ever used property management companies?
I actually started in property management. I got into real estate through property management back in 2010, 2011. I'm sorry, 2012, 13, and 14. 15 as well. I was in property management. Yeah.
It's interesting. That's to me, I think a lot of, and I'll ask you, Chris, I think a lot of realtors in the beginning think that they can do it all. And anytime I get asked about it, I'm always like, you can't, please don't. Focus on what you're good at. And if you're good at property management, then shift your focus to that. But I think a lot of realtors think, well, it's got to be easy because your companies like yours, like the Realty Medics, make it look easy. But it's not easy.
No.
It's not. And you're wearing a bunch of hats. And that's where, like, for me, the relationships is use us or don't use us, but use me as a resource. Like, you guys know selling. A lot of you only know selling. You may know a little bit about the rental game, but I see it a lot with like listings and leasings, and I'll work with agents like, this property's not renting, and then I'll do an analysis. I'm like, well, it's $200 or $300 over market. That's why it's not leasing. So I try and just be there to help out those agents because it is tough. Or the other coin you'll see is they'll help them lease it, and then the owners will self-manage from afar. Well, what happens when they're in New York and the property, they have a plumbing issue? Who are they calling? They're calling the agent. So then the agent becomes a de facto property manager when they don't want to be. So the way I look at it is if I'm just there to help them at some point, they'll either refer that client completely or partially and just be a resource for the agents and help them out. Because like I said, they know the selling, we know the renting.
Yeah. So a question about that, because I feel like your best referral source is probably a realtor, right?
Correct.
Explain, because you're out and about, you're out networking, you're marketing, you're doing business development, whatever their pretty terms they're using these days. So when you build the relationships, you're doing it so that the realtor will eventually realize, hey, this is outside my scope, or I've got a property. Is that the best way to describe what you do?
Pretty much, yeah. So if you were an agent, Ted, or actually Derek, we'll use Derek because Derek is an agent. If he's like, hey, my friend Ted has a rental property, he doesn't want to manage it, can you help me out? I'm like, perfect. Let's put me and Ted in contact together. You and I would have a conversation about what your goals are. We're an investor-minded company. We focus on the properties like an investment. So we really try to be an advisor as well, not just a property manager. A lot of what I do internally is marketing material, market research. We do quarterly updates. So we send out monthly newsletters to our owners because 70% of our owners are out-of-state investors. So they may only be hearing national market news or their local markets. We want to make sure they're plugged into our market and what's going on so they can be well informed. If it's time to sell that property, maybe 1031 it, or if it's time to add another property, what's the portfolio look like? Really just try, like I said, be that advisor for our clients.
That's awesome.
Let's talk about the market, and I'll start with you, Chris, and I'll ask Derek. In your world, Chris, what's the market look like? What's the rental market? Are there a ton of investors coming in, buying houses, and then they need to look for the Realty Medics to manage? What are you seeing?
We're still seeing that. Yeah, the market is still, we're still for the most part seeing the investors buy. What we're seeing shifting is the renter side. The market has cooled off. It does mirror in a lot of ways the sale market with the seasonality. This is the slowest time of the year. Not that many people are moving between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And the other thing to consider is, rental rates are pretty linear the last 3 years, going up on average 8% each year. So now that the market has shifted, and that they were overpriced to some degree because we didn't have that winter decrease the last 2 years. So now that, you may not be getting the $100, $150 more that you were a year ago, we have a lot of owners that aren't adapting to that. Things are taking longer to rent. And part of that is those owners not correcting. If you're $200, $300 over market, people who are looking for a property in that price point or that area aren't even going to see your property, or they're not even going to look at it because it's probably out of their price point.
Interesting. I sense that it's coming down. I've been seeing a lot of stuff on the rental side. For a while, like you mentioned, it was just, we had the worst reputation, and one of them in the country, for our incredible rent increases. But I have seen a lot of companies now advertising, hey, we've lowered rents. And so it's interesting that you brought that up. How about you, Derek? What are you seeing on our investment side, on the real estate investment side?
Yeah, actually, I think it's pretty close to Chris. I'm seeing a lot of investors buying rentals, doing a lot of refi cash outs. The bulk of my deals, I would say, in the last 4 months have been refi cash outs, or people looking to do like the Burr method. So there's a rental aspect to everything that I've done lately, as far as the hard money side goes. Especially too, and Chris, I have one for you. Are you guys seeing an influx in people asking about nightly rentals? Not quite Airbnb, but the room rent. Have people been asking you about that?
A little bit. What I've been seeing a lot in the last about 6 weeks is a lot of sales leads. They have a short-term rental that they want to transition to long-term, but they want to keep it furnished because it's not performing as well as they wanted in the short-term market. And they're long-term, and they don't want to get rid of the furniture. And, having the further conversation with them, they're like, well, I want to go back to short-term when the market gets better. So it really makes me wonder, like, did they do their research? And, we saw a real big spike in the last year of short-term investment properties being added to the market with people buying, because they saw post-COVID, that first year and a half were crazy short-term for us here locally. So I think a lot of people saw that, bought in, but they bought in too late. And it was already a relatively saturated short-term market. Even though we don't do short-term rental, I still like to keep my finger on the pulse a little bit, but having those conversations with them, it's like, you should have done more research before you bought in, or fully commit to the long-term. The pros of the long-term is there's can be less cash flow, but there's also less wear and tear on the property, less costs and expenses. So if you're trying to short-term and you don't have that nightly rate, maybe you should fully pivot and go long-term for a little while and try that out, because maybe it does fit you better. Some owners want to be completely passive. Most of our investors they want hands off. We take care of the property. Short-term's a lot more work, and what I'm seeing in my calls is a lot of those investors, they're not really sure which way they want to commit, and they're trying out short-term, but it's more work than they want, or they're having to pay a manager to make it truly passive. And those managers do charge a lot more. So they're cutting into their operating costs, or profits, I should say.
The other one go ahead, Derek.
I was going to say, no, Chris, you touched on something. And I think you and I have spoken about this before. One thing that I do, so when people call me about short-term rental, and I love short-term, I love the room rent idea. I mean, any way you can maximize, any way you can maximize a property, I love it. But one thing I always tell people whenever they call me, I'm going to run numbers on your long-term rental. I want to make sure that there's a DSCR, that you meet our DSCR long-term. Because, I mean, short, like you said, it's going to pivot. Something's going to happen. It's seasonal. Or maybe you just don't want to do it anymore. Did you just buy a property that you're going to have to offload down the road because it doesn't cash flow for you unless you get $5,000 a month? And so I kind of usually do that. I do two analysis. Does the short term work, which, a lot of the times if they're doing it right, it will. And then does the long term work. If you have to pivot, that plan B needs to be there. The capital markets like it. So when you want to sell this note off, they see that you have both analysis there. It works better for everybody. I think it gives the investor too a sense of comfort, knowing that, hey, if poop hits the fan, I can just refi, or I can just switch it up, call Chris, go long term. I'm going to make $300 a month, but I still have an asset that works. So I appreciate you guys doing that, man.
Yeah, and especially with, I read an article over the weekend that Florida's the second most overpriced housing market. So if we look at like the data points, right? Like, so that's one variable. But let's look at, migration. We're still number one in the country.
That's
We
right.
have 5 of the top 10, destination cities. Our GDP, depending on source, strength of economy, we're 1 through 3. Job growth, we're 1 through 3. So there's a lot of positive variables, but
Correct.
what's going to happen with rates? Inventory's up for 6 months now in a row. We're back to pre-COVID inventory levels. So I think if we do start to see some price corrections, and you're buying those properties with the goal of, I could just sell it worst case, that may not be a good idea. So it is good to touch on the long-term side. If you had to hold it, could you hold it for a year, 2 years, instead of trying to sell it and taking, a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 loss?
Are you both seeing? I'm fascinated by the whole pad split thing. I have to do a show on that because, wow, that is a fascinating little, and it just seems to be everywhere. But that's not for this topic. But I'm glad you brought it up, Derek and Chris. Are you seeing a lot of international people who are buying, Chris, and that you are working with, or is it still more domestic?
Still mostly domestic. We still have had a few Canadian investors in the last few months that signed on. Most of our investors are from California or New York. Actually did have a Brazilian guy come on. Yes, we brought on a few, but not most of it's domestic investors.
How about you, Derek?
Currently right now I don't have. I'm actually seeing people who want money outside of the States. They want to do stuff, in other places, and it. I spoke to a guy that's over in London because he was supposed to but he wasn't hard money. But I have a lot of people who want to get money out into different places for rental properties. They're not looking to flip; they're looking to do, short-term rental. Here, I mean, even in my own book of business, I may have 1 or 2 Canadians, but they're here. I just don't have them, in my book of business. But they're still investing, and I think they invest differently too. They pull funds, and they have their funds that they have. So, they're going in, as the big dog, and they're just buying what they need. They don't need a hard money guy. But yeah, they're out here for sure.
It's interesting. I'm getting a lot of inquiries about international buyers on my side of things and our side of things, Derek, too. And it just seems like they are holding, they're hesitating. The realtors that I've usually work with that send a lot of international buyers, or the old school foreign national buyers, they're seeing the same thing. I've asked them, I'm like, we talk about it a lot, but are they pulling the trigger? And they're not. And so I think it's interesting what you said, Derek. A lot of people want to buy outside. They want to find the funding because Europe is doing an amazing job, and so is the Caribbean, of advertising, hey, own a home here for pennies on the dollar or whatever. And so to have an expert here, that's why companies like MoneyCore and types of companies are having a banner year from the opposite transactions. Money going out of here over there.
Wow.
All right, Chris, tell us the best way that we can find out more about you. My realtor friends, I want you to reach out to Chris Rich. What is the best way?
Chris at therealtymedics.com, or you could always give me a call, text or call, 407-593-4938 goes straight to me. Anything I can do to help. Ever since I pivoted and I started learning about investing in real estate last year, when I switched to the company, I pretty quickly leveraged my primary, bought a new primary, turned the old primary into a rental that's now cash flowing well. And, so it's funny looking back, because I had friends earlier in the year like, oh, well, interest rates, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, but look at our market, look at the appreciation. I was like, the house we're going to buy, if values keep the same pattern, 3 to 5% a year on average, that $450,000 house is going to be worth way more when we try and buy it later. So let's buy the new primary now. And that's exactly, you know, rates, what happened? Rates kept going up. So we locked in the lower rate, got a house we wanted that's already appreciated loosely 15 grand, you know, in about 7 months. So,
Nice.
you know, I think my biggest piece of advice is for people who are worried about it, trust the data, trust what's going on, make educated decisions. That's the biggest fault I see with some of my clients is they don't do their research beforehand before they make a jump in decision. For example, guy bought a $1.2 million house in Alaqua at an auction because he wanted to long-term rent it. And it's like, it needs probably $200,000 to rehab the whole property. And it's not going to be a long-term rental. Like he bought it cash. He could have bought 3 or 4
Yep.
true rental properties instead of one bad property. And what's he going to do? Turn around and flip it? It's not going to, you know, he bought it in an auction. So it's, you know, I did
Vet
that
your
research
people,
and
know your info.
yeah, and
You
have
gotta
the
vet
team.
people, and you have to have the team, and you have to do your research. That's why you have to surround yourself by professionals. I don't know where I come into play there, but Derek, tell them the best way that they can reach out to you.
You got it. DerekCarmichael.co or my phone number 407-731-0215. Shoot me a text message and I will respond, guys.
Right. And y'all can reach me, you know, at 407-810-5670 for all of your more traditional loans. I appreciate you both so much. See, Chris, it was painless.
I love it.
I loved every second of
Great
it. Thank
job,
you,
bro.
guys. Reach out to Chris Rich, reach out to Derek Carmichael. I'll get you in touch with them. If not, gentlemen, have a great day. If you guys have an investment product, an investor you'd love to have come on and tell their story, please reach out to me or Derek. We'd love to have you on the show. Everybody, have a good one.
Thanks for having us. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.